March 12th, 1964. 8:19 p.m. La Sorella, a narrow Italian place off Lenox Avenue, kept its sign dim and its prices bright. Ellis Reed pushed through the door with a .32 tucked in his right pocket and a napkin in his left, like he'd come to wipe his mouth, not rewrite the neighborhood. The contract said Frank Lucas would be at table 7, as usual. One shot. Step into the kitchen, out the service alley, into a blue 61 Impala. 700 cash now, 700 after. Harlem wouldn't even finish its drinks before the body cooled. But the room felt staged. The pianist played too softly. The waiters walked too straight. Conversation stayed under a careful ceiling, like everyone had agreed not to make sudden sounds. Ellis ordered rye at the bar and watched Frank Lucas eat like the night belonged to him. Frank wore a plain dark suit. No rings, only a gold watch that caught candlelight when he lifted his glass. Across from him sat a lean man with a thin scar and no appetite. Ellis waited for laughter, for the practiced lean back that would open a clean angle. It never came. A waiter passed behind Ellis, slowed half a beat, and looked at the seam of Ellis's jacket as if checking a receipt. Two suited men by the front window shifted their chairs an inch, not toward Frank, but toward the path Ellis would have to take. Ellis tasted metal under his tongue. Easy jobs didn't make a room hold its breath. He set the ride down untouched and started walking anyway, because stopping would admit he understood. Halfway across the floor, he glanced at the kitchen door. It stood cracked open, bright with heat, but a shadow blocked the far exit, motionless, waiting. Frank's eyes lifted, found him, and stayed there. Not fear, recognition. Too soon. Ellis reached table 7 at 8:24. Close up. Frank Lucas didn't look like a movie villain. He looked like a man who slept well. His hands were clean. His cuffs were pressed. He didn't move to hide. He didn't signal a gun. He simply tipped his chin like welcoming a late guest. Evening, Ellis said, keeping his voice low, building a mask from manners. Frank answered without looking away from Ellis's face. You're early for dessert, he said. The scar man's eyes tracked Ellis's jacket pocket with quiet hunger. Ellis kept one hand on the chair back, the other buried in his coat, wrapped around the pistol grip. He felt every gaze in the room hook into him and hold. Frank lifted his glass, took a slow sip, and spoke again. Ellis Reed, he said, pronouncing the name like it had weight. Ellis's stomach tightened. Frank continued, come as a banker reading numbers. 146th Street, above the pool hall. Sister in the Bronx. $20 on Fridays when you can. Ellis's fingers went cold on the gun. He couldn't decide whether to pull or to run, and that hesitation was the first thing he'd lost tonight. Frank nodded once toward the waiter behind Ellis. The waiter set down a small plate and slid it forward. Under a folded napkin sat a stack of photographs. Ellis flipped the top one and saw himself at a barber chair on 125th, the envelope half in frame. Another showed him lighting a cigarette outside La Sorella 10 minutes ago. The last was tied on his pocket, the gun's outline clear. You've been walked, Frank said softly. All day, the scarred man leaned in. You fire in here, you don't leave, he murmured. Frank didn't raise his voice. I'm not here to punish you, he said. I'm here to meet the man who sent you. Ellis swallowed. I don't know his name, he said, and hated how weak it sounded. Frank tapped the photos once as if counting. Then you're a messenger, Frank said. Or a corpse. Pick. The room stayed quiet enough to hear ice settle in glasses. Ellis tried to buy time with talk. You want him scared, fine. Let me walk out. Frank's eyes narrowed a fraction. You walk out, he said, but you walk out carrying something he can't ignore. Frank lifted a hand, 2 fingers together, and a waiter appeared with a breadbasket. Under the linen, Ellis saw the corner of a thick envelope. Frank slid it toward him. Inside is what I know about your buyer, Frank said. Debt, women, the kind of friends who sell friends. Ellis didn't touch it. Why give me that? Frank's voice turned flat. Because you'll deliver it, and because he'll blame you for what's in it. That keeps you running. Ellis's jaw tightened. He understood the cruelty. Frank wasn't saving him, he was using him. The scarred man smiled without warmth. Take it, he said, or we make you disappear in a kitchen nobody visits. Ellis felt the gun in his pocket like a childish plan. He made his move anyway, not to shoot, but to stand. He pulled his hand out, palm open, showing empty fingers. I'm not killing you, Ellis said, loud enough for the nearest tables. That wasn't the job. Frank watched him, interested now. So what was it? Frank asked. Ellis shook his head. A test, he admitted, to see if he could be reached. Frank nodded, as if hearing confirmation. Good, he said. Then watch how I answer. He glanced toward the kitchen door. The cook there lifted a pan like a shield. Near the bar, a man Ellis hadn't noticed thumbed a small chrome box. Waiting. Tonight. At 8:27 p.m., the chrome box popped open and the dining room turned into a camera flash that wouldn't stop. White flooded everything. Glassware became stars. Faces became paper cutouts. Ellis's body finished the motion his mind was still arguing about. He yanked the pistol up and squeezed. The shot went wide, cracking into plaster. Before he could correct, a heavy shoulder hit him from the side and drove him into the table. Silverware clattered. The pianist kept playing, faster now, as if music could cover panic. Ellis fell, reaching for the gun as it slid away, but a shoe pinned his wrist to the tile with calm pressure. Someone spoke near his ear. Don't fight. You'll only make it worse. He tried to blink the glare away. It stayed, searing his vision into a milky blur. In the kitchen doorway, the cook swung the pan, not at Ellis, but between Ellis and the room, reflecting the harsh light back into his eyes. Then heat rushed his face, and a sting like ground pepper hit both lids at once. Ellis gasped and tried to rub, but hands caught his forearms. No, the scarred man warned. Hands off. Frank's voice arrived close, unhurried. You came in thinking this was a straight line, he said. Harlem is angles. Ellis tasted salt, tears pouring without permission. He couldn't see Frank, only a dark shape and the sound of control. You're going to live, Frank said, but you're going to live changed. Ellis tried to speak, but coughing took the words. Someone tied a cloth around his head, firm, not cruel, like bandaging a lesson. He felt himself hauled upright and guided deeper into the kitchen toward the back door he'd planned to use to escape. Behind him, the dining room returned to warm light, as if the disaster had been erased by money. The back door opened onto a service alley that smelled of bleach and wet cardboard. His eyes throbbed behind the cloth, and every streetlight became a bright wound he couldn't look at. The scar man steered him to the curb with one hand on his elbow. Walk straight, he said. No running. Running makes you look guilty. The rear door opened. Ellis was folded into the back seat like a package. The car rolled. Frank's voice came from the front, calm, almost conversational. Your buyer thinks he can purchase my evenings, Frank said. He wants proof I can be touched. Ellis pressed his fingers to the cloth, trying to see through it. The world was fog and glare. You're letting me go, Ellis said. Why not just end it? Frank paused, as if considering whether the question deserved an answer. Because I don't need your death, Frank said. I need your face. The scarred man chuckled. A face with a story. Frank continued. You're going to tell him you sat at my table. You're going to tell him you raised a gun and couldn't find me in the light. You're going to tell him I walked you out myself. Ellis's throat tightened. He'll kill me for failing, Ellis said. Frank's tone stayed level. He'll try, Frank said, but he'll hesitate because he'll wonder what else I know. The Cadillac stopped near 135th. The door opened. Ellis was guided out, feet on pavement, city noise rushing back in. Frank leaned close enough for Ellis to smell smoke and aftershave. Don't beg, Frank whispered. Deliver the message like you own it. Then the door shut. The car pulled away, leaving Ellis alone with blurred headlights and a future that suddenly had corners he couldn't see. At 1:11 a.m., Ellis locked his apartment door above the pool hall and stood in the dark, listening to balls crack downstairs like nothing had changed. He washed his face in cold water, but the blur stayed. A man who made money with precision had been turned into guesswork. He packed a small bag by touch, cash from a tin, a spare shirt, the bus schedule he kept in his Bible. The phone rang at 1:30. Ellis answered on the second ring. "You done?" the handler asked. Voice clipped, as if failure was a personal insult. Ellis kept his eyes on the sink, on his own reflection dissolving. He knew, Ellis said. He knew my name. Silence, then a slower breath on the line. "Where you at?" the handler asked. Ellis hesitated. Frank's words returned. "Don't beg. Deliver it like you own it. Tell him I sat at his table," Ellis said. "Tell him I couldn't find him in the light." The handler covered the receiver. Ellis heard a murmur. Then a new voice slid in, smooth, amused. "Ellis," it said, "you sound like a man who lost his nerve." Ellis's jaw tightened. "You sent me to test him," Ellis said. "You didn't want him dead. You wanted him measured." The voice chuckled softly. "Everything gets measured," it said, "including you." Ellis swallowed. "He let me live," Ellis said. "He wants you to know he can." The voice paused, the smile fading into calculation. "Can you see right now?" it asked. Ellis felt heat crawl up his neck. "Not right," he admitted. The voice sighed, almost gentle. "That's a shame," it said, "because I wanted you to watch what happens when a tool embarrasses the hand." The line went dead. Ellis stood very still, realizing he wasn't leaving the apartment ahead of trouble. Trouble was already climbing the stairs. March 15th, 1964. 9:08 p.m. La Sorella sounded normal again. Candles steady, laughter allowed, as if the room had never gone white. Frank Lucas sat at table 7 because habit was armor. A black Lincoln eased the curb, and a man stepped out in a neat coat and expensive shoes. Harlem called him Deacon, not because he prayed, but because he collected offerings. He crossed the floor with 2 suit men behind him and one more by the door, watching hands. Deacon stopped at Frank's table and smiled for the nearby diners. "Frank," he said, "I heard you had excitement." Frank didn't rise. He pointed to the empty chair. "Seat." Deacon sat, but he didn't touch the wine Frank poured. Frank spoke softly, forcing Deacon to lean in. "You sent a man to my table," Frank said. "That's an introduction." Deacon spread his palms. "Business," he said. "No hard feelings." Frank nodded once. "You didn't pay for a body," he said. "You paid for measurement." Deacon's smile tightened. "And I got it," he replied. Frank tapped the table. A waiter appeared and placed a sealed envelope beside Deacon's plate. Deacon didn't open it. His eyes did the opening for him. "Inside is your balance sheet," Frank said. "Names, debts, favors, and the judge you think is loyal." Deacon's throat moved. "If you have that," he said, "you want war." Frank shook his head. "War is loud," he said. "I prefer silence." Frank held him there with a stare. "Walk out," he said. "Keep your coat clean. And never by my table again." Deacon looked around, finally noticing the room wasn't his. The waiter's steady hands, the suited men by the window, the pianist who never missed a note. He stood, nodded like he'd won, and left without finishing his sentence. Frank didn't watch him go as the door shut. Ellis never saw the color of Harlem the same way again. Doctors at Harlem Hospital said the irritation had burned his eyes enough to leave scars, and that scars don't care about apologies. He could still see shapes, light, movement, but details hid from him like secrets. Within a week, he stopped being Ellis Reed and became a story that walked. Men at bars leaned close and whispered about the hit that failed, about Frank Lucas sitting still while the room itself blinded a killer. The truth was simpler and colder. Frank had planned an outcome where everyone learned something and nobody called the police. Deacon didn't try La Sorella again. Instead, he fought with quieter tools, squeezing suppliers, buying cops, starving corners, the kind of war that didn't make headlines. Frank answered the same way he always did, with patience and proofs. Every time Deacon's men tested a door, they found it already bolted. Every time a rumor started, Another rumor replaced it, sharper. Ellis tried to leave town, riding a bus south with his bag on his lap. But at a stop in Baltimore, a man sat beside him and said his name like a receipt being checked. Ellis got off at the next station and disappeared into smaller streets. Years later, people would swear they'd seen him near 125th, moving slow, head tilted toward sound, a blind man who still walked like he expected danger. And that was the aftertaste Frank wanted. Killing a hitter ends one problem. Letting him live ends 10. In Harlem, power wasn't only who could pull a trigger. It was who could decide what the neighborhood would remember. On March 12th, 1964, Frank Lucas decided memory was cheaper than blood and far more profitable. The warning kept walking. When killers asked for easy work, old men just nodded and said, La Sorella.